This is the first of a two-part series, this webinar on a tenant's business case. I'm Emily, I'm the City Switch City of Sydney Program Manager. If I haven't met you before, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you flick to the next slide? Thanks, Jess. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of our local area, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As you're joining us today, please use the chat. If you could drop in your name, your company and the country you're joining us from today, that would be amazing. We've got 130 registered for today's webinar. And just a reminder that it will be recorded. We have a City Switch YouTube channel, and the recording will appear up there in the coming days. I'll touch on a little bit of housekeeping as well. Please use the chat as much as you'd like. We'd really love to see people interacting during this webinar. Good morning, Erica. Thanks for dropping your name in there. And for more formal questions, if you could please use the Q&A function. So those questions that pop in there will be moderated and then answered later in this session. So while I've got you, I've got a little 30-second spiel on City Switch for those of you who aren't already members. City Switch is a free program for businesses, and it's designed to firstly simplify your journey to net zero, to secondly help you connect with other businesses, thirdly to understand best practice, and lastly to be accountable for your progress to net zero. Next slide, Jess. It's a national program, so it's run by the City of Sydney, Melbourne, North Sydney, Yarra, Ballarat and Port Phillip, and Neighbours is an associate partner. And you'll see on the screen there, we cover about 10% of Australian office space. We certainly welcome more offices and businesses to join the program. Next slide, Jess. This is the net zero pathway through which we structure the program. So today's session on green leasing sits under our reduce your office emissions stage of that pathway. Next slide. That will be all from me. So great to see 85 people have joined us so far, which is fantastic. I'll now hand over to Ed. He's the Director of Sustainability Consulting at JLL, and Jess, the Senior Sustainability Consultant, to facilitate this webinar. Thank you both.
Thanks, Emily, and welcome everyone to Green Leasing Event Series hosted by City Switch and JLL. I'm really excited to be here. As your host, it's a pleasure to be here for the first of two webinars exploring how green leasing can help unlock business value. As mentioned, I'm joined here today with my colleague, JLL colleague Jess, who's been instrumental in the development of the Better Building Partnership Green Leasing Resource Pack. In addition, Jess, if you can jump to the next slide, please. In addition, we have two amazing guest speakers with us who'll share their insights into green leasing and the drivers behind why it's an important tool in their sustainability toolkit, but more importantly, how they built the business case. Tim Farley, the National Head of Strategic Transaction Advisory at Colliers. He'll provide insights from an agent's perspective, and Jack Russell, the Compliance and Governance Manager at Airmaster, an innovative building services solutions company, who'll provide insights on a tenant's perspective. Jess, if you can jump to the next slide. Of the two webinars as part of this series, the first one is on that business case for green leasing, and then the second one, which will be on Thursday at the same time, 10:30, does a deep dive into those green leasing clauses. But today's focus is more on that tenant's business case, why green leasing matters, how it helps create value, and how it's evolving in the marketplace itself. That second webinar, as mentioned, will go into the detail, and we'll have a look at how people and organisations are actually implementing some of those green lease clauses. So let's get started. Before we do get started, as Emily mentioned, this whole session will be highly interactive, and I'd love to get a sense of, from the people in the room, how familiar you are with green leasing and its application in commercial offices or offices in general. So I'm going to launch a poll. Thank you very much. So as part of that, you've got a couple of different options here. And while you're doing that, right, I'll give you a couple of moments to complete it. And while you're doing that, hit submit when you get a chance. How are we going? Excellent, excellent. I'll close that. I'll hand it across to my colleague Jess Choi, who'll touch on some of the fundamentals for tenants. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Ed. So thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really, really excited that you are spending your Tuesday morning with us. So to get started, we love a good definition on what a green lease is, so we have a common understanding of what we're talking about today. So a green lease is a commercial agreement between tenant and landlord that incorporates obligations related to sustainability and environmental performance. It's designed to minimize the environmental impacts of the property, reduce operating costs, and also to create a healthier and more sustainable space. So that's the definition that was drawn from the BBP resource pack and what we've developed and released last year. So on the right-hand side, we'll see a little flow diagram of what the leasing process is, and really to highlight the whole life cycle of green leasing. And that starts with the strategy development phase. So really incorporating sustainability at that strategic level before you start going into that transaction phase of looking for a new space, evaluating your options, negotiating the lease, and then preparing the space to be moved in, and then the operational phase of where you get everyone coming to the office on board, BAU, if there are any upgrades, and then at the end of the lease, and that kind of repeats as a leasing cycle. So what's the value of green leasing? We know that with the ASRS mandatory reporting in place, large corporates now have mandatory climate-related disclosure requirements that they need to start reporting against, starting from this year, I believe. Secondly, with the CBD program expansion, this means that building disclosure is expanding, which means we will see more spaces require a neighbours rating. Additionally, with the shortage of supply to meet the growing ESG or net zero commitment demands from organizations, there is that supply shortage. We have some research on the Sydney and Melbourne market shown up on the screen. And then we can see that there is a huge discrepancy of what's available currently in market, especially for buildings that are electrified. So, for example, in Melbourne, only 500 Burke and 101 Collins are electrified at the moment. Not too many in Sydney, but we do know that it's definitely something that landlords are taking note of, are planning to address, because it's up and coming as well. And finally, we also have the federal government leading the way in terms of having that government operations strategy, net zero. And so that really leads in key performance and green lease requirements from the government flowing down to the rest of market. So therefore, it's clear we can see that the value of green leasing is indisputable in dealing with the various challenges around meeting our net zero commitments or ESG objectives. And so really, really excited to delve into what we'll be talking about today, which I would like to hand over quickly to Tim to give us a little bit more insights on the role of green leasing in the business search for office spaces. Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Jess. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. So my role within Colliers is, forget the long title, Head of Strategic Transaction Advisory. I'm a tenant advisor that wanted a special name. But long story short, I sort of work with a lot of larger occupiers when they're sort of assessing what their options are, whether that be to stay in their existing building or to do or to relocate. And I think every tenant's objective generally when they start this process and exploring what they might do is what they might do better. So if we can just flick to the next slide, please. And so, look, generally a tenant advisor or a tenant rep, as many of you might be more familiar, we obviously help our occupier clients assess what their accommodation requirements might be, but ultimately what we're trying to do is align that to their business, to their culture, to their and to their sustainability commitments that many, particularly listed entities, have made. So we seek to align a lot of that up front just to understand it better. Ultimately, when we get to sort of shortlisting and reviewing opportunities, we're doing it with a lens that already has contemplated what green credentials might be there, and we can make sure that those are all negotiated as part of the terms we're looking at on behalf of that client, above and beyond the rent and incentives that others might otherwise sort of focus on a little bit more. Next slide, please. So ultimately, the successful outcome for me really is one where we look to, again, align what all of those client objectives might be. Most listed entities, as I've mentioned before, have sustainability commitments on their website. When we're looking at what those commitments might be, we often do see alignment of sustainability with the broader ESG related objectives, including diversity, equity and inclusion standards. But ultimately, the opportunity we really see in all of this is one for alignment between a landlord and a tenant. So if we're looking at what those green lease type opportunities might be, we will see with mandatory reporting and other bits and pieces that are coming through. We want to lessen the heavy lifting on the tenant, and ultimately push a lot of that those objectives across to a landlord where we're sharing data, reducing the time and cost and difficulty really that might be incurred by a tenant trying to achieve those mandatory reporting objectives. If we move to the next slide, please. So why it's important? Well, if we look at one of the key objectives in any accommodation review on behalf of a tenant, probably one of the first things that pops up is actually the attraction and retention of talent. And increasingly, we're seeing employees choose their employer of choice linked to things like what are their diversity, equity, inclusion, but also their sustainability objectives. We are a lot more conscious these days in terms of what the business is doing, and therefore it does play an important role in attraction and retention of talent. For landlords and investors, well, investors might be in the occupier, the business. So if they're a listed entity, again, investors might be more willing to invest in shares of that business if they can see that they've got sustainability commitments and are actually sticking to them with clear, transparent visibility around what they're doing and how they're achieving it. And for a landlord, the ability to attract tenants and retain those tenants is also heavily linked to a lot more green and sustainability initiatives that particularly when they are a bit more robust and reliable in terms of how they're structured into the lease. So for mandatory reporting obligations, as mentioned just before, that is only increasing and it's going to increase over time. And so the ability to maintain mandatory reporting and also the cost associated with that, the time and effort associated with that, will have an impact on tenants. So data disclosure linkages that we mentioned before, clearly that's something that tenants that in higher spec buildings with higher sustainability capabilities, it's easier to achieve, but probably we're talking when we start to look at the smaller tenants that might be thinking that they're saving rent by going to a lower grade building. might find that they end up paying more either through outgoings or their own internal costs in trying to satisfy the higher level of ESG reporting that's coming up. In terms of asset value and occupancy and cost risk, well, again, that's the most demand that we're seeing in the market at the moment in terms of tenants seeking out these higher sustainability credentialed buildings. And so from a value and risk perspective, you've got a much stronger demand coming from the market for these buildings, for the obvious advantages of they're just better quality, nicer environments to be in. They're doing the right thing for the environment, but they're ticking a lot of boxes that above and beyond just environmental. They're just nicer, more efficient, and cost-effective places to be when you look at the total cost element of it. If we go to the next page. So in terms of lease documentation and negotiation leverage, well, this is really something that we do need to nail up front. I think when we're representing our occupier clients, it's really putting in clauses that talk about what data are we sharing, how we're going to manage these, and how we're going to maintain commitments, not just to secure the tenant, but how we're going to manage this over the course of the lease. So whether that be the types of if we're having a refurbished building or an upgrade or a new building being delivered, it's what are the fixtures and finishes that are being used in terms of the base building. How might the tenant be doing things to help try and manage and mitigate wastage and cost? And that can be things like whether that be enabling fire stairs for interfloor travel without using lifts, or whether that be tenancy stairs, or whether that be sensor lighting and other controls that actually limit the use of electricity when things aren't being used, particularly in a hybrid working environment where you've got peak and trough days of attendance. There's a whole lot of things that we can build into the lease structure that actually support this better. So it's not just the tenant doing the heavy lifting, it's not just the landlord doing the heavy lifting, it's a collaborative approach.
Tim, could you jump down to the green lease initiatives in your deck and go through some of those for us?
Okay, and I am mindful of time. I can waffle, so thank you for pushing me along. So look, in terms of proactive and responsible management, that really is, I guess, agreeing what are the initiatives that both parties are going to be doing to try to maintain an efficient, sustainable building and tenancy in operation. And so these are all things that you negotiate. They won't be the same for every single building or tenancy, but it's having a mind of how you're going to address that in your lease and in putting commitments in there that can be relied upon. Fully electrified buildings is an interesting one because the grid can't always support a fully electrified building if everybody's asking for the same thing. So it might be a case of how we're going to transition into being a fully electric building. And so recently, we've represented Coles will be moving into 720 Burke Street here, which is a C-bus property. And one of the requirements for that transaction was that the building be fully electrified prior to the lease commencement date in 2027. So there are things like that, but it is a little bit of buyer beware in terms of asking for commitments that can't be delivered. But at least, if you ask the right questions during this process, you can actually make sure that you undertake your due diligence and have a reliable clause in there around, during the lease or during the commitment. You've got your technology enablers, whether that be sensor lighting or whether that be energy efficient taps or, destination control lifting and things like that could actually help reduce the energy wastage. Bookable collaboration spaces. This might be just an ability to reduce the amount of space that you're taking and therefore reduce the cost of running space that's above and beyond what your general requirements are. So again, it's being more efficient about how you use spaces. Electric vehicles, having access to electric vehicles, but also potentially even having a landlord provide fleet vehicles for a building that can be booked rather than people using their own cars to come in and out. That can be a means of reducing a carbon footprint by reducing the reliance on vehicles if you aren't, if you have people that might require a car for work purposes rather than just for commuting. So look, and health and wellness initiatives again, people probably mostly talk about end of trip facilities, but one thing end of trip facilities do provide potentially is an alternative to using vehicles as a transportation method for work. You're creating a healthier workforce, but also reducing the reliance on vehicles that clog up roads and obviously emit their own carbon footprint.
Tim, this is really interesting. I'd love to hear more. I might get you to pause there. It's obvious that your experience and knowledge and passion for green leasing is really, really in depth. I think what we can do is we could probably unpack a little bit more of this during the Q&A session later on. But yeah, thank you very much. It's great to hear some of the insights from an agent's role in working through this process with tenants in particular, and for that matter with landlords. So yeah, much appreciated.
I'll very quickly just say that I'm not an agent, I'm a tenant advisor. Okay, we'll make that distinction, but no, thanks very much.
Yep, excellent, Tim. Thank you very much. While we're pivoting at this point in time, I'd like to go back to our first poll and just do a recap on the results. So I'll reopen the poll, pop it up on the screen. And so from the results that we asked the question, how familiar are you with green leasing? And then what the results that we have, we've got 17 or 18% saying that they're very familiar, about 42% with some familiarity, 34% saying that they have a limited understanding, and then 6% with not being familiar with it at all. So a bit of a breadth across the spectrum. Most people that have attended have had some understanding or experience with it. But there's always more opportunities to learn and build upon that. So what I'll do now is I'd like to actually open up a second poll. And this one is really looking at what some of those main drivers are for your organization in terms of exploring green leasing. And it should be up on your screen now. And I'll get you to submit. So we've got a few options there. Is it drivers for net zero? Is it cost saving? Is it that collaboration that Tim and others have spoken about before? Or is that differentiation that you're looking for? And the results are coming through. We can see strong component there. 71% of people that have responded have said it's ESG and net zero alignment at this point in time. So that compliance component is really important for those that are attending. Great. So I'll shut that one down. We'll share the results for these polls after the webinar. Okay, so before we move forward, I'd like to hand it back to Jess, who will now touch on green leasing connections to the net zero journey, which is a perfect segue into the results from that poll. So Jess, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So if my slides, yep. So as you know, Tim touched on as well, and what I touched on earlier, we do, and as you guys have said, that net zero alignment is really, really important, and is the main driver at the moment for green leasing, which is really, really good to hear, because as we know, we have that mandatory reporting in place upcoming for a lot of companies. So by FY28, over 6,000 companies will be required to report against the standard. So this has significant knock-on effects within the built environment, but also around that data sharing, partnership, and also the clause that goes in to ensure that both parties really collaborate to meet that compliance and regulatory requirement. In addition to that, we do have that CBD commercial building disclosure program. This also increases the transparency on performance. So, in the property sector, we'll see close to a 10-fold increase in the size of the market that requires a neighbours rating, with the periodical and transactional certifications likely to play a really key role in improving the performance of existing building stock. So certifications using the voluntary rating tools such as Green Star, it will continue to provide a point of difference, especially when it comes to dealing with Scope 3 emissions. So the next part, I'd like to touch a little bit on that myth busting, and I know from what Tim has shared earlier, he's actually touched on a few of this. So that's really, really great to know from the practical sense. It reinforces what we do know and what we hear from our clients as well. The first one being, green buildings are too expensive and it'll increase costs. So, in reality, a green building is typically able to reduce your occupancy cost by 15 to 30% compared to a conventional building, just because it's more efficient energy-wise. It's been intentionally designed to maximize performance. And so while the upfront investment is high, in the long term, you will be able to reap the cost savings from that increased efficiency. So with that, I'd like to also caveat that it's really important to not only rely on the efficiencies in the building that you move into, but also to make sure that you're having operational efficiencies within your own workplace, within your tenancy, because that will really, really increase and maximize the value you get from moving into an efficient space by making sure you are doing your part to reduce operating costs at the same time by looking at where you can be efficient. The second one is green lease clauses favor the landlord and does not benefit tenants. So that's actually not true. Whenever we talk about green leasing, we really want to emphasize that it's a partnership approach. It's not using the stick to kind of get the other party to do, what benefits only one side of the table. It's really about how can we find that shared value to really work towards a common goal. So we have different value propositions, different drivers to why we're coming to the table to have green lease clauses or have the conversation around green leasing. So it's really, really important to make sure that both of you take on a collaborative partnership approach towards entering the lease negotiations, but being really clear upfront on what your expectations are and sharing maybe why they are why you're requiring a certain clause to be included in the final lease.
Jess, thanks for that.
Yeah.
What I might do now is, it's really interesting to see some of the compliance drivers and also the way to bust those myths and navigate those challenges. What I might do now is launch another poll to keep things rolling. We're asking the audience what some of their biggest barriers to adopting green leasing, what are they? So poll should be coming up now. While that loads, just a reminder that we have the panel Q&A coming up. So jot your questions down in the questions section, and we'll put them to the panel members later on. So some of the options here: biggest barriers to adopting green leasing in your organisation. Clauses seem complex, uncertainty on commercial benefits, limited collaboration or engagement, or competing business priorities, or another option down the bottom. Okay, and let's have a look at the results coming through. Quite a spread here. So it seems like there's not one particular issue that's standing out from those that have responded so far. Those at the top, uncertainty on the commercial benefits comes through, limited collaboration. So it sounds like limited collaboration is leading at the moment, but that's one that's been really emphasised by BBP in the past, and also City Switch and those that have been speaking today as well. Excellent. All right. So before our next case study, what I want to do is put forward one final poll, and this one is on who typically leads sustainability outcomes during the lease negotiation process. I'm going to launch that. Excellent. So Who leads this for you within your organisation? Is it the sustainability team, the property or facility management team? Is it legal or corporate? Or is it a shared responsibility across? Great. So here we have a pretty clear indication that it's a combination so far of the property and facility teams, as well as a bit of a shared responsibility. So it's either being, I guess, on the smaller basis, smaller lease agreements probably done by the property team, but for those larger transactions, there's probably more of a collaborative approach required. We'll keep that one going. And then hand over to our next case study, Jack Russell from Airmaster, who'll share some of his experiences from a tenant perspective. Over to you, Jack.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, just want to share our experience of our lease negotiations on our head office in Scoresby, Victoria, and how we were able to get some sustainability initiatives included in the new lease. Next slide, please. Yeah, we're a large air conditioning and refrigeration and building services company across Australia and New Zealand. You might have seen our trucks. We've got about 600 of them driving around all over the place. And yeah, so when we've been a City Switch member for over 10 years. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the background to this project was our head office in Scoresby. It's a typical standalone mid-tier office warehouse combination built in the 90s, and we're the sole tenant in that site. Our lease was up for renewal in 2025. We previously implemented some improvements on the site and replaced some of the air conditioning units and upgraded all the lighting. But we had a number of issues that needed to be dealt with as far if we were going to stay in the property, and some building issues, but we also were very mindful of our own sustainability objectives as a company, and we wanted to get as much value out of retaining our occupancy of the site. And we previously looked at solar for the site, but it was difficult for us to justify funding ourselves. But what our approach to the lease negotiation was to deal with our landlord or owner and to look at offering a longer term lease in return for some improvements to the site that met our requirements. Next slide, please. One of the main issues we had were the HVAC units. These were ducted split systems. We had 16 of those that were installed as part of the original construction. They're all at end of life cycle. Of course, they were well maintained by Airmaster, but we were starting to get frequent breakdowns and complaints. But we were also conscious of the fact that they had a phased out refrigerant, R22, and higher energy, limited energy efficiency and operation was certainly an issue for us. And there was also risk associated with the breakdowns and the cost of repairs due to the non-commercial availability of the R22 refrigerant. And there's just an example of the units there. The outdoor unit there is on the roof, and the indoor units in the ceiling space in the office area. Next slide, please. So we were able to get a new lease agreement. It started with having a good long-term relationship with our tenant, with our landlord, sorry, and we were able to negotiate a replacement of 2 HVAC units per year during the term of the lease. We also were able to get the owner to provide the solar installation. There was 2 separate systems that we had to install. And there was also a bunch of other minor building refurbishments and improvements that we're able to achieve. And there's just some screenshots of the actual lease in there. And it was it's very transparent and very clear as to our obligations as a tenant and the the owner's obligations to us as well. And we've seen improved temperature control and air quality. We've now got an 8-year lease, which I think we would have been probably reluctant to do without these all these improvements. We've replaced 10 of the HVAC units, and each one of those is at least a 15% reduction in energy use. And we've gradually replaced all of the old nasty R22 with newer refrigerant and new technology and better air conditioning control. Next slide, please. And we've got our solar PV systems installed, delivering us renewable energy on site, and that's very much in line with our sustainability objectives as a company. And we were able to retain, get the outcomes we want, and have but also have a solution that suited the owner as well. Just a few tips to close on. Obviously, we're an air conditioning company. We've got a lot of insight into HVAC, but if you do have a HVAC service provider, make sure that you have a planned preventative maintenance plan in place, and also get information from them about your equipment. If it's over 15 years and it has R22 or R410A, it's basically at end of life. So it's important to start the conversation with the landlord about upgrading those units. And anything you put in now will have better sustainability outcomes than what you have now. That's all I've got, and look forward to any questions in the Q&A session. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jack. That's really great stuff. Very interesting to see an actual example, or a real life example of these approaches being put into practice. And it sounds like you've really built the business case as part of that process in terms of getting that clause across the line and those initiatives up and running. So yeah, brilliant stuff. Fantastic. Just a reminder that we're about to jump into the Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, either jump into the chat or to the Q&A component of the webinar and log them there. What I'll now do is invite Jess, Jack, and Tim to join me in having a conversation around what some more of their insights might look like in regards to the actual implementation and their role. So I'll start with Tim. From your perspective in the market, how's tenant demand for sustainability and ground lease clauses evolved in recent years?
Yeah, look, probably in the past, and it's interesting sort of seeing some of the crossflow of questions that have been popping up here, in terms of, is it commercially driven or otherwise? Probably in the past, it might have been commercially driven. People probably paid it lip service and thought that it's a nice to have, but we don't want to pay for it. But I think now that once you look at it, the business case more holistically, you can actually see the returns on that investment come through in so many more ways. So, even again to the point of maybe investors holding you accountable for not meeting those requirements can cost you the intangibles of attraction and retention of talent. You maybe don't have as many people wanting to work for you because you're not ticking some of those boxes. So we've sort of hear a lot of in the market at the moment is the key demand is really at that flight to quality, and the quality being those buildings that tick those sustainability measures far better than things that are of a lesser quality. And so if you look at it in that sense, the rental might be higher to be in that higher quality asset. The operational costs and efficiencies of the building can actually then reduce, obviously over the course of your lease term, you can actually have lower operational costs. But ultimately, tenants we're seeing are willing to pay the higher rental associated with a higher sustainability credentialed building, and better managed building, because they can see the benefits to their team and to their business overall, in also satisfying the commitments that they've made.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. It's really quite interesting. Jess, do you want to sort of build on that, especially in terms of the limited options associated within the market, for, as Tim mentioned in the flight to quality scenario. How do you see these trends aligning with the broader market shifts and what's happening in terms of regulations with like ASRS and the new expansion of the Commercial Building Disclosure Program?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Thanks, Tim. And definitely, like, it is becoming more front of mind. And while cognizant that, you know, there is that shortage of supply at the moment, the alternative, I guess, is working with your existing landlords to understand what's possible. I guess really highlighted from what Jack shared is, you know, Jack, Airmaster had a really good relationship with the existing landlord, and building upon this relationship that you have, it gives that opportunity for, greater collaboration, greater partnership approach. And so we like to say the most sustainable building is one that's already existing. So while we have that flight to quality, it's also a good opportunity to look at how we can see and work together with the landlord to stay and improve the performance from our side and landlord side to really meet our net zero targets and goals moving forward.
Thanks, Jess. It is really interesting to see the evolution in the marketplace and the trickle-down effect. With that in mind, Jack, I'm really interested in the motivation behind, if you can build on that, the motivation from Airmaster to pursue their green leasing and use a green lease as part of that process to actually get the upgrades done. How did that align with the broader sustainability and business objectives that Airmaster have in place?
Yeah, it definitely was a big factor. So we started mapping our carbon emissions, scope 1 and scope 2, from about 2021, and we set up a working group, and we set targets for scope 1 and scope 2 emission savings. So that filtered through to all of our managers and key operators at the sites, and so it's definitely a big factor in doing it. And because we lease all of our properties, there's a limit to what we could fund ourselves in sites that we don't own, and there was a limit to what we could go back to a landlord on an existing lease as to what they would do, because we've already signed a contract. But having that, being able to incorporate those changes with the lease renewals on a number of properties has been a very effective way to get towards our own sustainability reduction targets.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. It is, that alignment is really important. We're seeing it more and more and more. There's the sort of partnership between both the sustainability objectives and the business case, and the two go hand in hand so much more than they have in the past. It's really interesting to see. Tim, we have a question in the Q&A section from Jeff Elliott at ANZ. Hello, Jeff, by the way. So Jeff asked the question, of those green leasing initiatives, which ones are you mostly seeing for the commercial buildings and which ones for the retail sector? Interesting question here, Tim. What are you seeing?
So, look, I won't comment so much on the retail sector. I do represent a number of retail clients, but really sort of specialise in the office space. So that's probably where I can speak from experience a lot more. But look, it's such a varied, how we sort of deal with these things does sort of come back to an asset by asset type approach, because they all tick the boxes differently. But in terms of, if you've got a landlord that's promoting that they've got a 5.5-star neighbours rated building, understanding how they're achieving that and how they're going to maintain that, and how much of that is the building doing the heavy lifting versus tenants, and also if you're in a multi-tenanted building, what are other tenants in the building doing to also contribute to achieving that, so that it might not be placed too heavily on yourselves as a tenant moving into a building. So a lot of it really does come back to that transparency and that data sharing, and ultimately an agreement of committing to maintaining not just standards today, but looking forward, how you'll continue to sort of proactively work towards, meeting new benchmarks where possible, and again, how that might play out. And from a tenant's perspective, obviously commercially, you might be sensitive to, well, how and where that might cost me, but you can put provisions in there. The landlord can get benefits in many ways, and so it is their asset at the end of the day. But it's really about working through that. It could be waste management. There's just a lot of things that I would probably say waste management, and how a neighbour's rating would be maintained over the course of a lease are probably the ones that get the most attention.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that from that top tier commercial perspective. I'm very keen on finding out how that, and having seen some of the work that Jeff's doing in the past, how that translates down from that commercial office space, 10,000 square meters within the CBD area, all the way through to a smaller retail branch located in like a suburb. And how can some of those organizations apply those different principles, but at a much smaller scale? So
yeah, I might just add one little comment there. Is there's the operational part during the lease, but again, there's the front end part before you actually commit to a building and move in, and so there can be a lot of things that do get attention, and probably touch on what Jack has been sort of doing in his negotiations, is around what you're actually getting the landlord to do to help achieve certain standards as a commitment to going in or as a commitment to stay. And so there can be a lot of base building modifications and things that can be undertaken to help achieve those marks, and then really that is making sure that commitment is one that's delivered upon. If you're already in there, it's a time frame to do it. If you're moving in there, it's obviously before commencement.
Yeah, good point, Tim. Yeah, and I'm interested in throwing it to Jack and get his point of view on, in terms of that process, what aspects were the most valuable, and what would you like to see more from landlords during that negotiation, and for that matter, during ongoing operation. Jack?
Yeah, I suppose it was, I think, the most valuable part of it was probably getting those landlords on board with us as a company and our objectives, but also I think aligning what we were doing with their expectations. In we weren't trying to do anything. We're not trying to put a wind turbine on the roof, or what we're doing is doing things which enhance the value of their asset, and they're things that any future tenant would want. So I guess from a landlord's point of view is that certainly them being more understanding of what tenants are looking for now and in the future, based upon the regulatory requirement and the international situation we're in. So that and the owners of the type of property that we have are often quite older investors, self-managed supers. So it's a different conversation with dealing with large corporate property companies.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Jack, because, well, spoke about that earlier. A lot of the institutional investors and landlords, they're very quite savvy in comparison to your private landlords and some of the smaller mid-tier and suburban and regional assets. That there will still be that trickle-down effect over a period of time, and they will still have to find that compliance, whether that comes through regulatory requirements or whatnot. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear from that perspective. Looking at pushing the boundaries and going beyond neighbours and Green Star, Jess, this is a question from Jack Blackwell at the City of Melbourne. Jack asks a question around well performance and whether or not we're likely to see well become a requirement like neighbours. What are your thoughts? I mean, bearing in mind, well tackles everything from indoor air quality, lighting measurements, thermal conditions, water acoustics, monitoring occupant experience, etc., etc. And then this is really pushing the boundary now, but do you think that might become a requirement?
Yeah, thanks, Fan. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, for asking the question. I think from a sustainability perspective, we'd love for these, great rating and certification tools to be, BAU. I guess with WELL, it does touch on the more S side of things, the human component, because, we spend most of our time in the buildings. In terms of whether I think it'll become mandatory, similar to what Neighbours has become, I'm a bit hesitant to say yes, just because certifications like Green Star and WELL, they are really, really great industry benchmarks. It's third-party verified. You know that the hard work's been put in, you can trust it. It's a little bit different to Neighbours, where it's a simple kind of performance measurement on that baseline. Maybe in the future, as we progress, it could be mandatory, but I feel like at the moment, the market's still kind of, there's so many aspects of sustainability that we want to incorporate, and it's one step at a time, which is really great. WELL is very, very comprehensive, and it's a great tool to really safeguard the health and well-being of people. So at the moment, I don't know if it will become a requirement in future. In the perfect world, it could be, it would be, because living healthily in the space, breathing clean air is so important. So fingers crossed.
On that note, going back to Tim, in a competitive market, do you see green leasing commitments having an impact on the success of those transactions that you're involved in? I mean, do they have a positive or negative impact? Do they help increase occupancy rates? Do they provide stronger tenant retention? What are you seeing out there, Tim?
Oh, Tim, you're muted.
Take myself off mute. Yeah, look, I think again, in terms of improving occupancy, so part of the flight to quality, we would probably link to that flight to experience related metrics, and there is a bit of a crossover in some of the things that were discussed before that do flow into, it could be fresh air, for example, and then linking indoor to outdoor, and using fire stairs and stairs for interfloor travel, which again can reduce the reliance on lifting, but all things that might then improve the user experience. So if we look at sort of pulling all of those things in together and say, well, what is the overall sort of marriage of WELL and ESG related, and ESG probably captures everything, related metrics, then we are seeing, particularly for those that have done this post-pandemic, so they've reimagined how they're using efficient, smart buildings to best support their business post-pandemic. We're seeing a great uplift in office attendance, and I probably can use Melbourne as a great example, because Melbourne, has probably been the one that's been struggling to get office attendance up. But for those that have actually done this post-pandemic, we've seen a real uplift in office attendance, and office attendance that is not as a result of mandating, but as a result of people wanting to attend the office because they feel better for it. So we've got a number of examples. I probably, I work for a number of the Wesfarmers entities, and we've seen one that actually relocated from a suburban location into the city not so long ago. They couldn't get more than 150 people in their office beforehand. We downsized them, moved them into a more efficient and better space in the city, and they're regularly getting over 400 people in the office now. We've actually had to exercise an expansion right because it's been so successful. So again, if you do invest in it, you get it right. Again, most businesses, their greatest asset is their people. If you invest in things that make things better for their people, and that healthy, efficient building typically makes things better for your people, then they want to turn up.
Excellent. Thanks, Tim. It's really insightful. I'd love to talk more about the link between green leasing and flex options in a commercial office space, but maybe that's a discussion for another day. To wrap things up, I've got this last question for Jack. And Jack, from your experience, what lessons or advice would you share with other businesses looking to embed sustainability into the lease process?
Oh, I think one thing is that you've got to do the hard work. I think all of our opportunities have come from us to really taking the initiative, taking a lot of time, getting quotes, looking at all the options, and making it as easy as possible for the owners to adopt, those requirements in the leases is certainly one thing. And I think aligning the initiatives with what with the future of the asset and how that's improved and how that works for future tenants. They're probably two simple things that would come out of it. And I think one other thing I can think of is, which I mentioned before, is particularly things like air conditioning. It's a very significant impact in energy costs and in tenancies. Getting the information from your service provider, asking them the questions. The typical tradies, they won't give you the information unless you ask for it. But if you ask for a report, or if you ask for ideas or proposals, they'll see an opportunity to get some work, and they'll give you a lot of help to help put your business case together if you just ask in most cases.
Excellent, Jack. Good insight and advice. I might try that at home as well. Just asking a trader to do something a bit more than just the general approach, standard approach. Before we close, and thanks for the panel discussion, been really insightful. Before we close, I'd like to hand back to Jess, who'll highlight a couple of resources that'll help those attendees and other City Switch members putting some of the ideas that we've heard today into action. So over to you.
Thanks, Ed. So as mentioned previously, there is that green leasing resource pack from the Better Buildings Partnership that is available on their website. And part of that includes a practical guidance, so like an easy 3-step kind of guidance on how you approach green leasing if you're at the start of your journey. It comes with heads of agreement templates and also a due diligence checklist. That's a really great starting point for you if you want to know how to incorporate sustainability into your lease negotiations or your final lease. It is really important to take those resources and tailor it to your specific needs. In addition to the green leasing resource pack, we also have the zero carbon lease guidance document that was developed by the City of Melbourne. So in that document, similar guidance, but more around the clauses that you can include that are aligned to net zero as well. So really, really valuable. And as part of this series, we have in development, in partnership with City Switch, the Tenant Guide to Green Leasing. So really high level, informative resource guidance document to help you on that journey to complement what currently exists in the market as well. In addition to the resource that we'll be developing in partnership with City Switch, we also have our next webinar series, which will be on Thursday. So the Thursday session will be a deep dive on green leasing clauses. So if you haven't already registered, you can scan the QR code to register as well. We will have guest speakers Alina from JLL and Lucy from Pollination Law coming along to give us the legal insight and the implementation side insight of how green leasing can happen and the great successes from green leasing. So that's this coming Thursday, at 10:30 to 11:30. That's the next webinar. So hope to see all of you there as well. Additionally, for those joining us from Sydney and Melbourne, we do have our in-person breakfast networking events. So the details are up there. So for Sydney, it will be on Wednesday, 12th November from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. at our Sydney JLL head office at 180 George. So if you haven't already registered, scan the QR code on the left to be taken to the Humanitics website to register. And for Melbourne, it's on Thursday the 13th from 8:30 to 10 at the Melbourne JLL head office at 101 Collins Street. Scan the one on the right for Melbourne. And so with the breakfast networking event, we will have a panel with guest speakers and also the networking opportunity to talk to each other in person over some nibblies.
Excellent. So getting quickly, there are limited spots, so go ahead and scan that code. We'll circulate a copy of this recording at some stage down the track. That is correct. One final survey before we wrap things up and thank our speakers. We just would like to get an understanding of whether or not you enjoyed the session, how much, and yeah, get a bit of feedback from this session so that we can refine it for future sessions. So while you're doing that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for attending. Thank you to all of our speakers, Jess, Tim, Jack, the team at City Switch for helping us set this all up. Much appreciated. And we hope to see you at one of our upcoming sessions, either on Thursday or in mid-November. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.